If you've been a viewer of this channel for a while, then you will remember this guy.
Welcome back to Spacebusters, the channel that makes you think for yourselves.
Well, the Spacebusters...
A 15-degree-per-hour drift.
I said space, not a globe, Bob. Bloody hell. So the Spacebusters made a response video to my original rebuttal to them.
Firstly, I would like to thank Simon Dam for taking the time and trouble to answer one of my questions. I know the work that goes into making a video, so I'm honoured that you feel my question is worthy of a counter-argument. Secondly, I would just like to emphasise that we have no affiliation with Globebusters.
See, told you, Bob.
We just happen to have a similar name and logo. And as for being a wannabe, not my style, mate. Let's get into it.
Actually, the angular sizes do change slightly, which is why we get something called annular eclipses. When the moon's angular size is smaller due to it being close to its furthest point from Earth, it doesn't completely cover the sun and leaves the sun's outer edges visible. This is called an annular eclipse.
This is what's commonly referred to as splitting hairs.
Enough of that rubbish. If you want to see the whole of this rebuttal, I'll leave the link in the description. But what's the meaning of this, I hear you ask? Well, they're back. Hello all and welcome to another episode of Tinfoil Tuesday with me, Simon Dan. Thanks very much for joining me. Today's episode was voted for by my patrons, so thank you very much to them. If you'd like to get involved in that, then please do check out the Patreon page. There's lots of rewards up for grabs there. I'll leave a link again in the description. So, back to the Spacebusters. This time we're taking on his original NASA fanboy questions. The one he produced first. Should be a good one. Let's run it.
Welcome back to Spacebusters, the channel that makes you think for yourselves.
The only thing it makes me think is, how do I share a country with you?
Firstly, let's take a look at Ripley's explanation of comets, the dirty snowballs of the cosmos. These things are apparently flying aimlessly around the sun, losing copious amounts of their mass as they get closer.
Yes, they do lose a lot of mass, but as a total percentage of its mass as a whole, then it's actually quite small every single trip they make here to the inner solar system.
Only to disappear off into the void until we spot them coming back again after huge time periods. When they do reappear, they're still losing thousands of tons of mass as they get closer to the sun. The huge tails of debris that they leave behind, sometimes hundreds of thousands of miles long, doesn't seem to diminish their size.
Well, it does, but given the amount of times that we see the same comet, then it's highly unlikely that we're going to notice anything. Halley's Comet, for example, has a 75-year orbit of the Sun. I saw it once, in the 90s, and I may not see it ever again.
Maybe they're picking up more mass as they whiz off again into outer space's extreme cold.
Making stuff up to try and ridicule the well-known established facts makes you just look silly. You did it last time too, remember?
But what about all the craters that are constantly facing Earth? Where the hell did those meteorites come from? Did they go around the Earth before they reached the Moon? Did they go through the Earth by some magical means? Is there some guy somewhere on Earth taking pot shots at the Moon with a big gun? But what mass? Space is meant to be empty. Maybe they're picking up dark matter. Apparently outer space is crammed full of that stuff.
More ridiculous comments?
Anyway, enough of that fairy tale. Lamestream science tells us that as the comet has no atmosphere, the solar wind is ripping off vast amounts of ice and debris, which we see as the tail.
Correct. There are two types of tail, a dust one and an ion one. Anyone who has studied the sun and or stars will know that there's something called radiation pressure. The closer you get to the sun, the greater this radiation pressure. This radiation pressure is responsible for the dust tail, which pushes the dust away from the comet's surface and out in a diffuse tail. These particles then become individually entrapped in the Sun's orbit, causing the tail to curve as the comet orbits. The ion tail is caused by gases from the comet becoming ionised by the UV radiation from the Sun. As ions are charged, then they are susceptible to magnetic fields, and as such, the ion tail will always orientate directly away from the Sun.
We, on the other hand, do have an atmosphere, and that's why our stuff doesn't get ripped away by the vicious solar wind.
Incorrect. It is our magnetic field that protects our atmosphere, not the atmosphere that protects the atmosphere.
So our fragile atmosphere is the only thing protecting us from the ravages of outer space.
Again, incorrect. Magnetic field, yada yada.
Thank God for clouds, gas, microscopic particles, air, water droplets, small insects and butterflies for saving us from the destructive forces of the cosmos. How lucky we are.
His flippant nature actually means he just gets debunked harder. It's actually quite nice.
Now let's take a look at the moon. NASA tells us that this celestial body doesn't have an atmosphere. This thing is supposedly whizzing its way around us on the Earth, which in turn is whizzing around the Sun, which in turn is whizzing around the galaxy, which in turn is whizzing towards the Great Attractor, which in turn is whizzing outwards in an ever-expanding universe.
Yeah? What's the problem?
All at incredible speeds that are hard to comprehend.
Hard for you to comprehend.
So taking all of this into account, we have to come to the conclusion that if you are lucky enough to have an atmosphere, then you're safe and you won't get all your stuff ripped away. Then why, my dear NASA fanboys, why doesn't the extremely fine dust that covers the moon's surface not get ripped away and form a tail just like the comets? The moon is following us on our journey through space at the same speed. It's just as close to the Sun as we are. It hasn't got an atmosphere to protect it, so how come all of the dust is still there?
Well, first off, the moon is 3,500 kilometres in diameter. A comet is only between 1 and 10 kilometres in diameter. That means that the moon can hold on to its regolith much easier than a comet can hold on to its ice and dust. The force from the solar wind is also considerably less than the gravitational force. Then you have the regolith itself. It doesn't sublimate like the comet's ice does. And having said all of that, the solar wind actually does have an effect on the moon. They are just very subtle effects that are very rarely documented.
Is it because our very own magnetosphere protects us? If that is your answer, then please explain why the gaseous planets of Jupiter and Saturn are still in one piece and don't resemble huge comets in our night sky every single night.
Now, I'm sure you've put the crickets and tumbleweed up here because you think there's no answer and you think it's funny. Give me a few seconds so I can express the cringe. Jupiter has a magnetic field too.
Answers on a postcard, please, addressed to Head of Children's Entertainment, NASA, USA.
Brilliant. He really thinks he's caught them out, doesn't he? He could have Googled it himself in like 10 seconds, but no, he's opened himself up to ridicule. Interesting choice.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I said, Jaren.
Please share this little video far and wide and enjoy the amusing responses you'll get from the fanboys.
I'll tell you what, given that you're probably going to do a response to this one as well, why don't we ask you a question? If space isn't real, where does Earth exist? Right, that wraps up another Tinfoil Tuesday. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks again to the patrons for voting for this one. Again, if you want to get involved in that, please do check it out. I've been Simon Dan. Have yourselves a fantastic week, and I'll see you on Friday where there's talk of a fourth member for the SEAL Team 6. Till then.